I'm always keeping up with the dynasty market and trying to find the best values for you and players that you should be selling high at every single point in time. And today I'm bringing you some of my top favorite dynasty players that you should be selling in the community right now, and just trying to maybe cash in pivots and just having, honestly, just conversation about some of these players that I'm a little bit concerned about going into the 2024 season. So make sure you comment down below some of your favorite sell high players right now in the dynasty community, and let's get straight into the video. My first player on this list that I already pulled 2 months ago, but I'm bringing him again because his value hasn't changed. And I think a lot of people are starting to see the eyes and the concerns that I'm bringing here. And if you're new to the channel, that is Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson is someone that, yes, we can see the pathways. We can see how he can be successful as a rushing quarterback. Now, there's 2 different pathways Anthony Richardson can go down. He can go down the Lamar Jackson pathway, that is a great passing quarterback, or an above average passing quarterback, however way you want to see that with Lamar Jackson, and a phenomenal rushing quarterback. That is fantasy production for him alone. Or he can go the opposite way. Can he be a phenomenal rushing quarterback, but not have the great passing upside that we were hoping for? For example, a Justin Fields. A lot of people didn't love Justin Fields as a talent because they were concerned about him as a passer. But we saw what he did as a rusher, and you were happy with that in a fantasy perspective. Now, my concern, if he does go down that Justin Fields route, is he going to be the franchise quarterback for this team in the next couple years? And yes, he's only going to his 2nd year, but if he doesn't get it done in this year, this could potentially be a make or break season. Obviously, he played 4 games this past year. One of my biggest concerns, 59.5 completion rating. As you can see here, average 18.4 fantasy points per game in those 4 games essentially that he played. In reality, he played 2 games because the other 2 games, he missed a good portion of it. As you can see, against Houston, 32% of the snap share. Against the Texans, or the Titans, 33% of the snap share. There's concerns if he does go down not only the passing concern route, but also the route where he can't even stay healthy, right? So keep that in mind. If you can pivot to some of these, I personally would say safer quarterbacks, I would. Quarterbacks that have a safer floor, and maybe just, I wouldn't say the ceiling of the Anthony Richardson, but I would say damn near close to that ceiling. How about Justin Herbert, who's already proven in this community? Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about his situation. I'm not. I would pivot to a Justin Herbert and get something in return. What about Jordan Love? Can you pivot to Jordan Love and get something in return? A Kyler Murray who has a rushing upside, who has finished as a top 5 quarterback in his career multiple times, and get something in return. What about a Joe Burrow who is currently ranked QB6 and Anthony Richardson QB7 in the community? Obviously, he has his own concerns with his injuries, but what we do know is that he is a phenomenal passing quarterback. Anthony Richardson currently in community QB7. On Keep Trade Cut, QB10 on the Flock Fantasy website, and he is my first sell high player. Okay, my second player on this list at the running back position here, and that is Zamir White. And let's have a conversation about Zamir White, because I know a lot of people are excited about him going into this season. Obviously, Josh Jacobs is no longer on this team. He's with the Green Bay Packers, especially what we saw in the second half of the season with Zamir White. Right? I mean, look, weeks 15 to 18, look what he was doing. 17.5 fantasy points in 15, 14.5 fantasy points in 16, 15.6 in week 17, and 13.1 in weeks 18. He was given that workload when Josh Jacobs went down, which was exciting. He was essentially the win now running back in that playoff span that you probably didn't start because you were too nervous about it, or maybe you had Josh Jacobs and you had nobody else to start, right? I mean, that is what's exciting about Zamir White going into this season, because there's also nobody behind him, right? Think about who's behind him with Alexander Madison, who's essentially lost his job to Cam Akers last year, and Ty Chandler, where he was eating into that workload. He couldn't stay on the field and win and, do most with those opportunities when Dalvin Cook was no longer on that team. I'm not worried about Alexander Madison. They also didn't really draft a running back that, you know, presents a big threat with Dylan Waddle coming out. I do like Dylan Waddle as a pass catching back. Now, is he going to be taking over Zamir White's opportunity? Absolutely not. But can he eat into that pass catching game? I don't know. Maybe we'll see in the second half of the season. But what's interesting is where he's valued currently on Keep Trade Cut specifically. And if you're a big Keep Trade Cut believer, or maybe you're somebody in your league is, whatever the case may be, RB21 in the community on Keep Trade Cut, I think, is a bit too high. Now, the Flock Fantasy community, our rankings a little bit regulated, I would say, and a little bit more realistic as RB33. And I think you can easily go out and sell Zamir White for some great value if you, and maybe one of your follower leagues or dynasty leagues members there, has Zamir White valued as this RB21 or higher. Look, these are some players that are going around Zamir White. Whether you're a win now team or maybe a rebuild team, I would personally rather have on my team. Derrick Henry, I would rather have. A Joe Mixon maybe as a win now team, right? What about Blake Corum, who had better draft capital than Zamir White? Obviously has Kyron Williams back there, but Blake Corum's interesting. What about David Montgomery, who is RB24 in the community behind Jahmyr Gibbs, and we saw how he finished early this past season. Ramondre Stevenson, and Alvin Kamara, a Javonte Williams, a Kendre Miller. Look, not only is Zamir White going to step into this opportunity in 2024, I would say the bigger question is he going to be holding that going into 2025? And if I can cash in right now at RB21 and get some value in 2025, I would, because I'm scared of this 2025 class because of how good the running back depth is. Now, you may know I mean, I know all these guys' names, but I can name a couple. Ollie Gordon, Quinshon Judkins, right? I mean, Alshon Gentry, right? Travion Henderson, Trevor Etienne, Devin Neal, who we liked coming out of Kansas this past year, but he went back to school. There is some opportunity for these running backs to take over Zamir White, and that's probably not even the best running backs that people are believing in coming out of the 2025 draft class. So if I can go in and cash in on the names that I said earlier that you could potentially pivot to: Blake Corum, David Montgomery, Ramondre Stevenson, Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller, right? I mean, Derrick Henry in a win-out situation, Joe Mixon in a win-out situation. I'm willing to cash in Zamir White right now, sooner rather than later. If you want to unlock all the perks that you currently see on your screen right now, all you have to do is use our promo code LAND at flockfantasy.com. Obviously, you can see a 2024 rookie report where we break down each and every player from the 2024 draft class, a personalized DM with Zach and myself, and answering all of your dynasty questions, whether it's like, hey, should I be trading this player? Should I be starting or sitting this player? Should I take this player in a trade? Whatever the case may be, we're there for you in that personal hotline DM. And also, you get a dynasty team review from us where we break down your dynasty team going into the 2024 season and beyond. So make sure you sign up at flockfantasy.com once again using our promo code LAND. All right, going into my next player, I don't believe a lot of people are going to agree with this because I think a lot of people may view this person as more of a buy low. But let me tell you why I believe he should be a sell high now, or get as much value as you personally can now rather than later. That is T. Higgins. Okay, T. Higgins currently in the community on Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 24 on Flock Fantasy website, wide receiver 25. What's interesting about T. Higgins is that I'm a little bit nervous about T. Higgins backing himself and saying, you know what, I'm going to be looking for this contract extension and not just finding the best value right now. And let me tell you why. Obviously, that is the best thing he can do for himself as an individual. Now, in a fantasy perspective, I think that does hinder what he could potentially be in the future. If T. Higgins does back himself and doesn't get a contract extension with the Cincinnati Bengals, or says, I'm going to be looking for another team to give me that contract, the biggest thing T. Higgins has to do is stay healthy. Okay, because T. Higgins does have his injury history, and it may not be as popping eye out to you, or like saying, okay, well, he missed like 2 or 3 games here or there. You have to realize some of these games were counted because he started the game, but he missed, right? T. Higgins is out for the rest of the game at the middle of the first quarter. That's annoying, right? This past year, he only played 12 games. In 2022, in 2023, he played 12 games. In 2022, 17 games. But you have to remember, he missed a lot of those games being in and out of those. I mean, if you're playing all 17 games, averaging 13.1 fantasy points per game and finishing as wide receiver 26 on a per game basis, that's not exciting, right? Obviously, he probably had a down year, but if you think about it, that was his most targets, the most receptions, nearly almost his most yards in that year in 2022. It was because he was injured for a lot of those games. In 2021, once again, played 14 games. I think it was in that season out of 16. So that wasn't too bad. That was his best season of yet, right? That was Jamar Chase's rookie year as well. Now, one of my biggest things and concerns, once again, is the injuries. And if T. Higgins cannot stay healthy going into the 2024 season, or even at the end of the 2024 season, what is his true ceiling? Currently in the community right now, if you haven't done your rookie draft, T. Higgins is worth a 109. I think that is a phenomenal value. At the 109, we've seen multiple people go there, like a Brock Bowers, like a Bo Nix, like a Brian Thomas Jr., right? We've seen Ladd McConkey go there. We've seen Xavier Worthy go there. We even seen Jonathan Brooks at the 109. Now, you may like some of those players, maybe even all those players over T. Higgins. But let's talk about next year. Let's talk about 2025. Because on Keep Trade Cut right now, he is worth a 25 mid-first. Mid-first is 105 to the 107. I would even throw the 108 there. And if the running back class is as good as it says it is, maybe some of these wide receivers could potentially dip down into that middle of the draft, or maybe even a quarterback. Is T. Higgins' value really going to readjust itself for him to get back into a top 15 contentions of these wide receivers? Now, I think there is a possibility, but not only does he have to stay healthy, he has to prove himself at a next level with Jamar Chase. And the only way I can personally see that happening is if he finishes as a top 5 or top 8 wide receiver this next year, where he potentially becomes an even significant value rather than just a first or a random 25 first or a random 26 first. So if that makes sense to you, let me know down below. But for me, T. Higgins is a huge concern and somebody I'm willing to cash in now rather than later. Here are some players going around T. Higgins that I'm okay to go out and get a little bit more value in return. Okay, here are some players going after T. Higgins. Jackson Smith and Jigba. I understand a lot of conversations there, but can I get Jackson Smith and Jigba and a little bit more? What about a Brian Thomas Jr., who actually had a better capital than T. Higgins, who was actually drafted in the second round? Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 1 on his team. Xavier Worthy is a good conversation starter. Would you rather have Xavier Worthy there, who maybe is a wide receiver 1 or the wide receiver 2 there with Patrick Mahomes? What about Ladd McConkey? Okay, going even deeper. What about a Jaden Reed and getting something else in return? I'm not doubting T. Higgins' talent. I'm doubting T. Higgins to stay healthy. And if he can't stay healthy, that means his value could potentially be dropping even more by the middle of the season, and you wouldn't be able to go out and cash in. So if you can, I'll be trying to sell T. Higgins now rather than later. All right, going into my next player, and that is Rachaad White. Rachaad White is somebody that I did bring earlier before the NFL draft, saying that this team could be drafting a running back, and they did, but it wasn't the running back that I thought, or an impactful running back as I thought they were going to be drafting. That is Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving does come in, and he's a phenomenal pass-catching scat back. He's not somebody that's going to be taking a tremendous opportunity away from Rachaad White. But one of my biggest concerns from Rachaad White is regression, right? I mean, he finished as QB4 amongst running backs this past year, and running back 4, excuse me, and RB10 on a fantasy points per game basis with 15.8 fantasy points, as you can see. Look, a lot of that opportunity came from the air. 64 receptions, 70 targets. That is exactly what you want to see from Rachaad White. But what is concerning is the inefficiency on the ground. On the yards per carry, as you can see here, 2 yards per carry, 57th with 36.6 yards per carry. Yards per touch was 33rd amongst running backs there. Breakaway run weight was 47th. He just wasn't efficient on the ground, which makes you concerned, because what happened early in this offseason, Topo says, you know, we want to take off this workload from Rachaad White. We want to change those things just a little bit. And what happens? Dave Canellis now is the new offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers, or head coach, excuse me, for the Carolina Panthers. And what happened with Baker Mayfield? He was dumping the ball off a lot. And if that's not the case with this new offensive coordinator and this new team, you know, the way that he's going to be calling plays, is Rachaad White even going to be as efficient as we were hoping for coming in? So we are going to be seeing regression. And if regression does happen, does this team go out and draft a running back? As we heard earlier from all these phenomenal running backs coming out in 2025, can he be replaced? I think he can. And why I believe you should be trading him now is because of his market value, RB14. Here are players going after him that I feel more comfortable with, whether you're win now or maybe a futuristic build. Josh Jacobs. I know I have a lot of my concerns about Josh Jacobs, but I'll take Josh Jacobs right now. What about Trey Benson, who's RB16 in the community? Give me Trey Benson every single day. Derrick Henry in a win-now situation. Joe Mixon in a win-now situation. David Montgomery, whether it's hybrid or in a win-now or hybrid situation, right? Players going ahead of him. Give me James Cook every single day. Kenneth Walker. These are some players going just ahead of Rachaad White that you could potentially cash in for before the season starts, before I expect to see that regression going into this season. All right, my next wide receiver on this list, I think a lot of people aren't going to like this guy either, or not going to like that I'm bringing this guy. That is Chris Olave here. And look, I'll keep this one short and sweet. What has Chris Olave done on a points per game basis? 14.4 fantasy points per game this past year. Wide receiver 19. Granted, he did miss a couple games. In 2022, 13.2 fantasy points, finishing as the wide receiver 25 on a points per game basis. Now, the receptions and targets are there. That's what's exciting about this. But you know what's not there? The quarterback play. Derek Carr, I would say, is a terrible quarterback for Chris Olave to grow as a fantasy asset. Now, Derek Carr, if you tell me tomorrow Derek Carr is no longer on this team and they bring in anyone else, then I maybe feel a little bit more confident in as a quarterback to distribute the ball to Chris Olave. I would be extremely excited. I would say, okay, Chris Olave could potentially be the best buy in the community right now. But the fact that he is wide receiver 11 on Keep Trade Cut and wide receiver 13 on the Flock Fantasy website, I am excited to go out and try to pivot in any way possible. And look, pivoting to as the wide receiver 9, to like Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is the wide receiver 9 currently in community. He has Daniel Jones, right? But I believe in that talent, that superior talent that was drafted in the top 5, top 6 pick in the NFL draft. Can I send Chris Olave and something to acquire Malik Neighbors? What about Drake London, who now has Kirk Cousins, who is the wide receiver 12? What about Rome Odunze, who, look, may not be the wide receiver value that you want to do now, or that you would hope and envision going into his rookie year, but whenever Keenan Allen is out of there, that could be perfect. Tyreek Hill is wide receiver 14. Whether if I'm winning now or maybe even in a hybrid, I'm wanting Tyreek Hill so much more. Nico Collins as a wide receiver 16. Give me Nico Collins and some more because of that contract extension, because in my opinion, he is the wide receiver 1 on that team. I'm not knocking Chris Olave on his talent. And keep that in mind when I'm talking about all these players. I'm not knocking them as talents. I'm knocking their situation. I'm knocking that if there are going to be a consistent fantasy production for me in the foreseeable future, and I just don't see that with Chris Olave right now. So if I can pivot to any of those players that I just mentioned, I'm happy to do so immediately. All right, and this next player, someone that we just bought in this buy, sell, hold video, but I wanted to bring a little bit more perspective from where I'm seeing this at, and that is Jaylen Waddle here. Jaylen Waddle is somebody currently in the community, wide receiver 10 on Keep Trade Cuts, and he is in a Flock Fantasy website Wide receiver 20, and I think that is going to change because a lot of these people have to update their rankings, and especially in the community is a little bit skewed there, I would say, when it comes down to Jaylen Waddle. But if we're looking at the bigger pool here, and as much as we love our website, we understand that Keep Trade Cut is a bigger pool of fantasy community and analysts and so on and so forth. Jaylen Waddle currently in the community as the wide receiver, as the wide receiver 10, I think it's a bit absurd. Guess he gets this contract extension, 3-year contract extension, what is absolutely phenomenal for him. But being the wide receiver 10 in the community right now, where he is currently the wide receiver 2 on his team behind Tyreek Hill, it's capped. It's absolutely capped. And he hasn't even finished anywhere near that top 10 mark. I mean, he did finish near the top 10 mark, right? If you look at 2022, which 15.3 fantasy points per game, and he was a wide receiver 12 on a fantasy points per game basis. And I'm talking about per game basis, fantasy points per game. Because I know Jaylen Waddle was a top 10 or top 10, yes, wide receiver. If I'm not mistaken, his rookie year, he broke records. I understand. Once again, I'm never knocking the talent. I'm knocking the situation. And if I want Jaylen Waddle on my team, I need to understand that that upside is capped with Tyreek Hill there. Not only is Tyreek Hill there, he wants a contract extension. He wants to retire with his team. All the reports coming out so far after Jaylen Waddle got his contract extension, he was like, I want to be on the books a little bit longer. And if that is another 2 years added to his contract that he has for another a total of 3 years on his contract, where is Jaylen Waddle going to be? On his third contract, is he going to get an extension to be with the Miami Dolphins? I'm not necessarily sure if we're ever going to see the Jaylen Waddle, the wide receiver 1 numbers being produced. But he's around the wide receiver 1s, which I want. And that's why this is a phenomenal pivot. I just kind of mentioned as a wide receiver, Chris Olave as a wide receiver 11, Jaylen Waddle, the wide receiver 10. Who's the wide receiver 9 on Keep Trade Cut? Malik Neighbors. And I'm a Giants fan. Obviously, I love it. What about A.J. Brown? Can I pivot to A.J. Brown, who I know is the wide receiver 1? Maybe I have to pay a little bit more. What about Drake London, wide receiver 12, Rome Odunze? I would even pivot to his teammate in Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins. Can I get more in return? Because the community is just overblown his production and his value, or not overblown, but just not production, but his value currently right now, that I'm willing to go out and trying to pivot when it comes down to Jaylen Waddle. Guys, these are my top players that you should be going out and selling right now in the Dynasty community. Once again, make sure you comment down below. Let me know who you agree with and disagree with. I think a lot of people are going to disagree with 2 names, and that is Anthony Richardson and T. Higgins. But anyways, let me know. Comment down below, and as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.